Everybody, it's about time to get started. We still have a few people joining us, but they can hop on as they do. Again, my name is Brian with SMMware, and we're going to be walking through various aspects of SMMware today. And we're going to follow 4 basic tracks within SMMware. Here in the blue, we've got the main track of clients to sales leads, creating jobs, entering hours and expenses, creating invoices, and along the way, we'll also talk about uploading files. Here in the green track, we'll talk about organizations and contacts, and then we'll move on to task notes, calls, and calendars. I'll just touch briefly on mobile, and then we'll talk about integrations with QuickBooks and MailChimp, and these days we also integrate with Zapier. And this is our starting point, talking about sales leads and clients and jobs. And now you should be looking at the home page of our demo site. Let's say that someone gives you a call. We'll come down to sales leads. Start a new sales lead. We will assume that this is someone who we've never spoken to before, so we're going to create a record about them as a person, which is the client record. I'm going to give them an email address so we can make use of some of the other functionality later. On the screen, we'll have some custom fields which apply to them as a person, as opposed to information that changes when they move from one place to another. And these labels, these are our custom fields right here, this whole set. And these labels are completely configurable. But as I said, they should apply to them as a person. It could be mobility issues or what time you can call them, things like that. Down below, you can see that there's a drop down, and this is one of the things that you might find handy is if you deal with certain locations on a regular basis, say a senior living center, then you can arrange to have them appear in this drop down. And when you pick them, the address is filled out, and you simply have to put in the apartment number or the suite number, whatever. And while we're here, let's see, we'll talk about the referred by fields. This is, you have 3 different fields here so that you can start at the most broad category. So it could be something like a website or senior living center. And then you move down there to company, and from there down to the person. And in our referrals report, that allows you to slice and dice the information in a variety of ways, including date ranges. And you can answer questions like, where did our business come from in the 3rd quarter of last year, and so on. Once I've finished my information, I can go ahead and save this client. And now they are here in this drop-down. And I'll start filling out the other fields here on the sales lead. So we're distinguishing between a client record and a sales lead record because over time, you may deal with somebody repeatedly. They can be a repeat client, and each time you go through the sales process. And the sales lead as an entity gives you a place to put all the information about that opportunity that is separate from the quote. We will talk about quotes in a minute, but for now, we'll just start with this other information that we're gathering. And we also have custom fields here. These are specific to locations. So for instance, like an elevator code, that is going to change if somebody moves from one place to another, presumably. On this field, or on this profile, we also have the idea of the drop-down of addresses again. One of the things that we have new, recently added, were customer decision dates, last submitted date, and the won date. And by filling these out, SMMware will fill out or create a task that notifies people so they can keep in touch with this particular sales opportunity. So if we designate a lead salesperson, and then when we save, they will get, the system will create a task that notifies them. We can actually come down here and see the tasks. And so now there's a task created for Janet to look over the details of the sales lead, and they have to mark it off as something that they reviewed. And that way there's a reminder date for it. They get notified now and at the reminder date. It's set for 3 days, but you can set yours differently in the settings editor. So this basically is SMMware helping you to keep in touch with your sales opportunities. We also create a note at the same time, and as things change throughout this sales lead, you'll build up a series of notes that give you some history. If you change who the lead salesperson is, if you submit a quote to them, you'll just have more and more notes that tell you exactly what's been happening. Going to go ahead and create a quote as well. And after you've worked with SMMware for a little while, you will most likely create some templates, and then you will use those to start a quote. It's pretty rare to start a quote from scratch. You certainly could, but it's probably not that common. And here we've created an initial quote. You can see the various line items with the details. The items in gray are ones that are going to be pre-filled, and then the other ones are fields that you can change. For Suzanne, yes, once the salesperson has looked at the sales lead strictly from the point of view of getting to know the details, then they can go ahead and mark that particular task as being closed off. And as the system gets, or as you go through the sales process, and you give them a quote, then the system will create a task for you to follow up on the quote. If you're in a conversation with the client and they say, well, we think we're going to make a decision in about 2 weeks, then you can put in that date into the customer decision date field. It will create a task, and that way the system will remind you that you should follow up with them after that 2 weeks has come up. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we get back to the main screen. Coming back to the quotes, again, the gray fields are information that would be pre-filled for you, and then anything that's not in gray is something that you can modify, which includes all these different text fields. We have different kinds of blocks within our quote. This is a headline block. It's got the larger text in bold. We've got the line items where you have hours and rates. We've got a summary block, and we have a legal block. And at the top, we have the client block with client information. Go ahead and save that. You can view that as a PDF so that you know exactly what the client is going to see. You can also email the quote to the client as a PDF attachment. When you go to do that, you are allowed to set the subject and the contents of that email. This is initially pulled from the settings editor. You create a default, but then you can customize it each time. And over time, the client might get your first quote and say, hey, I like this, but as a matter of fact, we can, you're so affordable, we can do even more. So then they want a new quote with some additional work. So I've used the copy button. There's a field right here that is not part of the quote. This is where you can let yourself know why you created a new quote version. So that way, over time, if you have 3 different versions of the quote, you can look at these notes and understand why each one was created. SMMware has 2 basic approaches to how you can charge your clients. There is one assumption is that you have the same rate throughout the entire job. So Anne-Marie, you're not seeing the changes. Are you saying your screen is frozen? Okay, let me, I'm going to unshare and then share again. All right, so you should be able to see my screen now. Let me know if you do. I'm moving the window around. Okay, excellent. Sorry about that. A little technical snafu. Again, we have 2 different ways of how you charge your clients. One approach assumes that you're using the same hourly rate for every hour across the entire job, and that's the simplest approach. For Steve, you could, if you're not showing in the entire screen. You can do the way to maximize it within Webinar Ninja. It should be in the upper right-hand corner, a way for you to maximize it. So again, the one approach is to charge the same hourly rate across the entire job. And the other one is called job codes. And the reason for that is that you enter a code for a given hourly entry and it has an associated rate. So that allows you to have different rates for different kinds of work. This particular quote was built on having a single rate for the entire job. And here's the other one per job code. Coming back to the main screen, you can see that where we created the two quotes, this used to be alone, the new quote button. Now we've got edit quote 1, edit quote 2. And as you add more quotes, they would just appear here. And SMMware gathers these all together, so it's obvious that these various quotes are all part of the same sales opportunity. They're not in a list where they're all mixed together and you have maybe a little bit tougher time telling which one is which. Thought I'd revisit the idea of the customer decision date, the last submitted date, and the one date. The customer decision date and the last submitted date, they do create tasks, and that task will have a due date that's either a week out or 2 weeks out or 3 days. That's something you can set in the settings editor. And again, you'll be notified when that task is created, and you'll be notified when the date is reached. And that way SMMware is constantly prodding you, hey, are you keeping in touch with your various sales leads? So this is the listing of sales leads, and we have a filter at the top. This is common throughout SMMware, that there will be a gray bar where you can affect the listing based on date ranges or the various status levels. In this case, for instance, the lead salesperson. There's a sales report here that tells you how many different entries you have for a given sales status level. And these status levels are something you can customize as well. We also have a chart that breaks it down by percentages. And the idea is that you can get a sense of where your business, where your sales leads are coming from and what your closing rate is and so on. From here, I'll move on to talk about jobs briefly. A sales lead and a job are basically two sides of the same coin, and they have the same fields. We're looking at the listing of jobs right now. I'll go ahead and edit one. And there will be very familiar fields, if you remember from the first view, elevator code, for instance. So when you create a job from a sales lead, information that you enter there can get copied over. This is a good time to touch on the file manager. Go ahead and multi-select some of these. When you're on a mobile device, you can also do multi-select. You can assign a tag. This list of tags is something configurable as well. The idea is that you'll walk into a room, you'll pick which, you'll take some photos, you'll pick which tag to apply. Also, when we selected the different photos, they all had long cryptic file names, and that's not so easy to have a conversation about. For Winesta, no, we do not accept the videos. You don't upload videos because video hosting and the size of the video files are significantly larger. You can reference the, like if you had another place to post videos, you can put links here, but admittedly, you don't upload the actual video. Going back to the file naming, we've got the auto rename checkbox right there. I'll go ahead and upload these photos. So here we have our files that have been uploaded, and you can click on one and then start running through the gallery. Back here in the main view, you can pick a place to put a note. And you can rename the photos, change their tags, rotate them, rename them, and so on. You can also share the images. This particular button lets you download them again if you wanted to. This button allows you to share them. Since SMMware already knows who the client is and what their email address is, then you can just click on this button to share it. For Suzanne, you're saying that you're Suzanne, are you saying that your screen is not working? So for the people who are having trouble with the screen, was it working for a little while and then it stopped, or was it never working? Yeah, okay. So if there's only a few people who are having the issue, then I would suggest doing as Anne-Marie recommended and hitting the refresh. Coming back to our sharing of the files, since SMMware knows who the client is, you can just click on this slider and it'll share it with them. It'll share it at the time that we hit save. If you want to share it with a contact who might be maybe somebody who works at a moving company, then they would appear in this list. And once you hit the save button, they would get their email with an invite so they can come look at the images. All right, so that's the file uploading. I'm going to go ahead and look at what it's like to enter hours and mileage. Here I have a drop down with all the different employees since I'm an administrator. And if I was not an administrator, that drop down would simply not appear. I can put in the date that the work was done, select which job, the start and the end time. There's another format, is a system-wide setting, wherein you can choose to enter hours based on the total hours instead. Here's where I can put in the description. For Anne-Marie, the HEIC photo format, I don't remember if browsers can view that natively. We can arrange to, it's not a default file extension, we can add that file extension so that you would be able to upload them, but I would just have to look and see if browsers can natively view the HEIC format. Coming back to our entry, we also have a field where you can enter mileage, travel based on distance. And SMMware supports a formula where a certain number of miles can be free. And then after that, there's a charge per mile. And this can be used either for paying associates for traveling or for charging clients for the travel. And those figures can be different. So you can have different free number of miles. You can have a different rate per mile afterwards. SMMware also supports metrics, so that would be kilometers instead, of course. We also have a place where you can put in your break hours. And you can mark it as billable or not. If you worked in one place in the morning and if you worked in one place in the morning, one place in the afternoon, then you can create both entries from the same screen. You click on Add New Row, and you get a new place to put your entry. For Kathleen, in terms of switching from the total hours to start time and end time, let's go ahead and talk about that offline after the webinar. It's something that can be done. We just have to talk through it a little bit. So this is what it's like to create an entry. Up at the top is the area where you create new entries. Down below is the list of existing entries. And once the job has been closed, the hourly entries drop off of here. And the idea is to keep this particular listing down to something reasonable instead of going on infinitely. The other place you can go is the history file or the history command, and that does let you see your hourly entries for closed jobs. But here on this screen, we kind of want to focus on the here and the now. Let's take a look at recording expenses. Again, we'll put in a date. We'll select which job. In this case, we have to put in the amount and pick a vendor. And we need a description. There's a little button to the left of that with the click marks or the hash marks that brings up some predefined terms. You can customize these as you will. And the idea here is that if you're on your phone, it saves a little bit of thumb typing as long as you're happy with using a short predefined phrase. A constant throughout SMMware is that we try to give you a head start, and then you can modify things from there. So you can, after you select picture hangers, you can go ahead and modify it as you like. Here's where you can upload a receipt. So let's say you're on your phone, you take a photo of the receipt, and then you upload it through that. You can mark it as billable or not. And finally, we'll talk about this radio button, where the reimbursable means that your employee paid for it out of pocket, and then they are the ones who need to be reimbursed. If they used a company credit card, then company will be the right choice for you. And the question of whether the client has to pay you back or not, of course, really goes back to the billable checkbox. All right, from here, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the invoices. We went to the invoice manager and we're looking at a listing of invoices. We have two different kinds of invoices, the itemized and the flat fee. The flat fee is where you're simply saying that the invoice is for, say, $3,000 and that's it. There's no detail. It's not tied to the line items like which day the work was done and how many hours was done. It's just a flat fee. Down below, we can see those details, all the different line items. And we can see the summary. This is the web page view. Here at the top, we've got some buttons for emailing the PDF of the invoice to the client. If we click on the PDF button, we'll see what it looks like from the customer's point of view. This SMMware offers 3 different versions, and you can pick any format at any time, depending on what you think the client will what will work well with the client. For Tom, yes, we integrate with QuickBooks Online and with QuickBooks Desktop. So again, this is the summary format, and it's very simple. It has a single line item for the major categories like labor and expenses without breaking down into detail. The next format we have is the detailed invoice, which really does have every line item that applied. So you can really trace through exactly why the charges are what they amount to. And you can pick the format that you think the client will spend the least time, debating. If it's a really long job and the detailed invoice starts to get really long, we offer a roll-up format where instead of having a line item for each and every day for every employee on that day, all the entries get lined or get brought in for that day, and it just says how many associates and the grand total for that day. Here back on the main view, we've got some notes. This appears on the invoice. Here we have a private one so that you can write yourself a note maybe about the experience of working with a particular client. Sometimes you have to send the invoice to where they were originally living, and sometimes you have to send it where they're going to move, where they're moving to. So we allow you to pick those addresses from here. For Tom, yes, the version that gets copied to QuickBooks would be the detailed version. Let's see if there's anything else that we want to touch on here. So this wraps up our first track. To review, we started off talking about sales leads and client records and how they progress to jobs. We talked about entering your hours and expenses. We talked about invoices, and along the way, we talked about the file management. So we do have for Melinda, we have the ability to put in a client rep, and then that would be, if there was a client rep appointed for that particular client, then in the, say in the address bar, there would be a line entry that was marked as being for the client rep. All right, so moving along, our next section is the organizations and contacts. So hopefully, Melinda, that answered your question. Within SMMware, the organizations are companies, the contacts are people who work at those companies. In the organization manager, you'll see 3 different kinds of companies. They are the ones that you spend money with, the traditional vendor. You will also see let's go ahead and take a look at it. And you will also see categories for people that you recommend to your clients, like home improvement. So even if you don't spend money with them, you can put them in here and have all of your home improvement people gathered together. The different categories are something you can customize, so you don't have to work with the categories that come by default. And the third category would be people who recommend you to potential clients. So for instance, senior living centers might recommend you to, or lawyers might recommend you to your potential clients. So as you can see, when you come to the organizations section, it's categorized, and opening up a given section shows you all the entries for it. And then that information can be exported, and you can see the alphabetical view, things like that. Within an organization profile, down here is the section where you can see some contacts. You could go directly to the contacts section, or you can work with contacts from here. For Anne-Marie, you can import contacts into SMMware from a spreadsheet. You would match the header, the column headers, and you export it as a comma-separated variable format or a CSV format, and then that can be brought into SMMware. So you definitely should not wind up retyping all the contacts. So here's the import. I went to the admin menu down to import content and pop that open in a new tab. And here's where you can see the commands: import associates, import clients, import organizations/vendors, and import contacts. And so that is something that can definitely be done. I believe we have Liz Donovan on the webinar as well today. She's our accredited trainer. So if you have some questions or you need a little help with getting that import done, it's definitely an option to talk to her. And we have some templates down here that help you figure out the process of importing it, like what the format ought to be. But definitely you should not wind up having to retype all of the information that you already have in some sort of well-organized digital format. Going back to our organization profile, we can jump over and look at the contacts profile. And you can see where you indicate the categories. You can indicate more than one category. And I'd like to point out that you can assign tasks to contacts. When we go back to the organization profile, you'll see that you can do that there as well. So for instance, if you want to keep in touch with someone who works at a particular organization, you can create a task and set yourself a reminder to follow up with them in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever. And the same is true for notes and calls. We'll be going into details about those shortly. And let's go ahead and look at the organization's profile, just to show you that there's a file manager, places for tasks, notes, and calls. There's also a place where you can indicate that this is a vendor that you spend money with. And once you have attributed some expenses to them, then it's locked in and you can't undo it because you've used them as a vendor. That's why this one is not editable, but otherwise you'd have a checkbox there. So that is our organizations and contacts section. Now we're going to talk about tasks, notes, calls, and calendaring. For Tom, regarding QuickBooks and clients, you can copy clients to QuickBooks either directly. So for instance, here's let's see if we can find one that has not already been copied. So this is the list of clients. Here's a button that says QuickBooks Add, and it would copy things over. The way that SMMware interacts with QuickBooks, it gives you a lot of control over when things go over. It's not a system where every couple of hours things get copied over to QuickBooks automatically, then they pop up when you don't expect them to. You can simply say, copy this client over, and you don't have to retype it. You can copy the client directly over, but it's probably more common that you are copying over some hours. And then SMMware says, oh, this is a brand new client. Before I can copy over the hours, I have to copy over the client. And we'll touch on that a little bit more when we talk about our integrations. But so definitely you should not have to recreate things in QuickBooks that you did in SMMware, whether it's a client or the hourly entry or the expense. So Tom, hopefully that answers your question. So I'm going to go back to job, and we'll talk more about tasks, notes, and calls. We're looking at a job profile. We scroll down to the bottom. I did want to point out we have a file manager and a restricted file manager since I'm in the neighborhood. The restricted, rather than go file by file and say this one is going to be restricted, this one's viewable by everybody, we just have two different buckets, the restricted file manager and the regular one, to make it more obvious that, hey, this is a place to upload a PDF of something sensitive like a signed contract. This regular file manager is a place to upload photos of the home. All right, so here's our tasks for this jobs section. I would also point out that when you create a job and you assign a team lead, that team lead will have a task created for them, and it will instruct them to review the job so that they can be familiar with it, and then they mark it off as complete, so that way other people will know that, yes, they've seen this job, they're familiar with this job. So here we are looking at tasks. If it is late, then it's going to have the date in red. And then you can see the rest of them where the date is in the future and it's not in red. You can see who it's assigned to and who it was created by. Let's go ahead and let's look at what it's like to create a new task from scratch. So far, all the tasks that we've talked about have been system created. We're going to assign a due date. And you can have 2 reminder emails sent to you. So we'll do right around the same time. Maybe one the day before. You're going to have priority. Later on, when you're finished, you'll mark it as such, but it starts off as not started, of course. And when you select finished, it'll fill in the date that was completed. You can assign it to somebody. And then you put in a summary. If we filled in those fields, we can hit save and go back. If you want to look at all the tasks that are in this particular job at once, there's a printable button. That way you don't have to go task by task and review them. After you've worked with the system for a while, you'll notice that you are creating the same sets of tasks at different stages of the job. And then for Susan Devaney, you can try reloading if your screen is stuck. So after you've worked with SMMware for a while and you create groups of tasks, then you'll want SMMware to help you out with that, and we call that a task group. And within the settings editor, you can define various task groups, which is a grouping of tasks. So here's one for pre-sales. And it consists of multiple tasks. If you don't need a task for this particular moment or this particular job, you can click on the X to get rid of it. But you can see that various aspects of the tasks are already filled out for you. It could be the description and the summary, and you could have it pre-assigned to somebody. So if there's, say, floor plans, and you have one person who specializes in floor plans and all of your floor plan tasks go to that person, then why not have them assigned to that person by default? Susan, hopefully your refresh worked and your screen is moving again. So that's what it's like to work with a task group. We have different groups defined in the system right here. I should also touch on the settings editor. Go to admin, settings. Each one of these bars represents a group of settings. You can expand them and see all the things that can be modified for that particular area. You can see that we have a fair number of sections, and each one of those has a fair number of things you can modify in it. So the bottom line is that SMMware is very customizable. All right, from tasks, we're going to move on to talk about notes, which are simpler than tasks. You don't have to worry about due dates and so on. You just put in a summary. You can have some text that appears in the note by default, a preset. And then from there, the presets are meant to convey to whoever's filling it out what sort of information you're trying to collect. But as I said before, our philosophy is that we give you something as a head start, and from there you can do with it what you will. So if this is not a case where I need that, I can just get rid of all the preset text and put in what I want. Again, notes are very simple, just the summary and the longer body of the note. SMMware will tell you who put in the note and when. So these are all created by me at various dates, and you develop a history in that way. We also have functionality for logging that a call came in. It looks a lot like a task. You can use this for a call that comes in randomly, and you put the call date, essentially now. You can use this to help plan future calls, in which case you just put a date in the future, and you set a reminder, and you, of course, want the phone number. You'd want to indicate if they're calling you or you're calling them. You can assign it to somebody, and again, you have the summary and the body of the call log. And then from here, I'm going to jump over to the home page. All right, here at the top, we have some sections which are not viewable by every employee. You have to have the right permissions, the higher permissions. So this is the status board for your ongoing operations, your ops, your jobs. And the idea is to give you the 30,000-foot view and to use color to help make it quick. And you can define these different tags yourself. You don't have to use the ones that come with the system by default. But right now we've got good, flag, and alert. So flag means something minor is wrong. Alert means that you have to call them right away. And you can modify these notes. We have a similar section for your sales. And again, the tags are customizable. You don't have to do medium lead or cold lead, medium lead, hot lead. You can do whatever you like. More tags, fewer tags, different colors, different labels, so on. On this page, every section that begins with the word my means that an employee. So for Winesta, right now you would tie the call to the client. That way you're knowing exactly who it's going to be. There's been some requests to add call notes and tags that are not, or at least tasks and calls that are not tied to any particular entity. So that capability is not there at this moment, but it may happen in the future. All right, so again, on this page, the words that begin with the word my is going to have a customized list per employee, and every employee will have their own. So for Winesta, if it's an information-only call, I mean, you could have right now the system does have you put in some sort of a client, and some people put in their own company as a client, and they assign things to that, whether it's a task or a call. This first section right here is for my tasks, and it has all the ones that are assigned to me, whether I created it or not. And I can go to edit them and mark them up from here. The next section is my tasks that are delegated. So this is a task that I created and assigned to someone else. If I'm the company owner or administrator, then I can see this section, all unfinished tasks. Then that's the entire company. If a task was marked as being completed within the last 5 days, it will appear here. That way you can have some concrete reassurance that it was done instead of looking through the longer list and just not seeing it. Here's the section for my calls. For Anne-Marie, sure, I would be happy to answer questions at the end for you before we would hang up. And this section is called Invoices for my approval. Invoices have an approval step, which is optional. The idea is that your team leads are the people who were on site. They know which employees were there and what kind of work was done. So you might want to have them look over the invoices and approve them prior to sending it out to the client. So if I was a team lead on a job, there was an invoice, then it can be approved by me. But again, the administrator, we can turn that feature off, and then the administrator can immediately go to the approved invoice phase. We also have an optional approval system for when you enter hours and expenses. And if you have that turned on, and then you're an employee who is, or if you're a team lead and somebody's created hourly entries, this is where I would go to say, all right, these all need approval. And the next section is for the employee after they've created an entry and the team lead has rejected it. Then here's the ones that you know that you need to revise. Down below that, we have a list of teams where I am the team lead. And we separate that out from the teams where I'm just a team member, where you don't have as much responsibility. Back when we're looking at contacts, I didn't point it out, but there's a field for marking the ones who refer business to you. And on the homepage, this section will look at all the people that you say refer business to you and the last date of contact that you have shown in there for them. And it will generate this list. The idea is that it's going to prod you to keep in touch with the people that send you business. So if it's been too long, then they might be mad at you and you'll want to have some way of reminding you to get in touch with them. These next two sections, we pointed out that a client, or I didn't point it out actually, but there's a field for the clients whether they're willing to act as a reference. And this is where the salesperson who's going into a meeting can generate a list of people who are willing to act as a reference if the client asks for that. The second list here, the clients that you need to ask, these are people where the job is now over and yet their field is left as being unasked, whether they're willing to act as a reference. So by working through this list down here, you can keep the first one fresh. And finally, we have this section for my schedule. And just as it sounds like, this is going to have events where I am an attendee at, or at least the main contact. This is not going to have everything across the entire company. From here, we can go to look at the master calendar, which is up in the main menu. Under the associate profiles, you can give people permissions for various features within SMMware, and the master calendar is one of them. They can have no permission, or read-write permission. And one of the ideas on this calendar is that you can use color to say something about a given event. And these tags at the bottom are helping you with that. I've seen people use these tags in 3 different ways. These are very configurable for the labels, the colors, and what they're tied to. But the simplest approach is to distinguish between a job and a sales meeting. So we have green and kind of a yellowish, tan, brown. From there, we've got another approach where you're using the tags to indicate the kind of work that's being done, say packing and unpacking. So purple is going to be a packing event. This is going to be an unpacking event in the dark green. The third approach I've seen is to say who the lead person is for that event by means of the tag. So then you can say this light blue is Judy, and that's an event where she's the lead. And then Carmen is the lead for this darker brown, and Margot is the lead for the darker blue. For Diana, the colors are, I'll go to the settings editor. So you're asking about having more colors, but it's a pretty much open palette as is. So I guess I would say that there's not going to be more colors available than that, but all the colors are there. All right, so that's the tags. And we can also have a tentative event outlined with its border. So you can look at the calendar and say, oh, that event may or may not happen. For Candy, there is 1 tag per event. Because you can only color it with 1 color as you're looking at the calendar. Down at the bottom, we have some filtering. I'll go ahead and click on a date, start a new event. Those same tags that we saw in the main view are represented here: job versus sales, packing versus unpacking, Judy, Carmen, Margot. And when you pick the tag, if it's tied to a job, you'll get a drop down of jobs. If it's tied to sales, then you'll get a listing of sales leads. You can put in a description. Also insert the addresses, because SMMware knows where they're moving from and where they're moving to. So you just go ahead and click from one of these buttons. And it puts in what we call a short code. And when you save this and go back to the main view, that is turned into a clickable link. It takes you to a mapping function. Here's where you can indicate that the event is tentative. Sometimes you want to skip the notifications when you make a change because you feel like it's so minor. So for instance, here in the main description, if you change that at all, SMMware will normally send out a notification via email and text message. But if you feel like it's not necessary, you can just go ahead and click on the skip. You can set a couple of reminders. And finally, we'll talk about how you manage who your attendees are. We have 3 different approaches, and each approach has its own way of thinking about things. We'll start with the direct approach. The thinking here is that you've already spoken with people, you know who's going to do the work, and you don't need SMMware to help you figure that out. But you do want to formalize it and get it into the system. So you just go ahead and pick them, and then they will get a notification saying you are assigned to this task. There's no need for a back and forth. The next approach is invite-based. So now here you're looking for SMMware to help you out. They're going to get an invite email and notification. They can respond and say that they are interested or that they're not interested, or available or not available. And then you, as a final step, would pick the team. You can indicate the team size here. And you can use this functionality in a couple different ways. The normal approach, or the default approach, is to send out invitations. Some of those people will respond back and say they're interested. And then as the final step, you'll pick your team from that. Since it is a business event, it's not a case where you're going to invite 10 people and then 8 people show up, and that's fine. It's more like you need 3 people, and neither 2 nor 4 would be good. The other ways you can use the invite approach is a first come, first serve. So if you invite everybody, but you put a team size of 3, then the 4th person and on will get a message saying that, I'm sorry, the team is full. You can use this for multiple rounds of invitations where you have 3 people in mind, you invite them. One of them says they can't do it. Now you need to fill that slot. So you come back here and you invite someone else. Only the person who has been added gets their notification. And you can just go through as many rounds as you need to in order to fill the team. These first 2 approaches you can think of as being client-driven because you start off by talking to them and figuring out the date, and then you go back to filling in the slots with people to do the work. The third approach you can think of as being employee-driven. It's called availability. And the employees will come here to the My Unavailability section. So what they're doing is they're putting in the times that they can't work. And they might say, well, I can't work Friday morning, and so on and so forth. They can manipulate this. They can stretch it. They can drag it to a different day, and they can click on it to get rid of it if it was not needed. So for Allison, if you are using the availability approach, then you would not be able to assign her to a day where she's asked off. And if you're using the invite approach or the direct approach, then the availability is not tied to it. So the availability, the idea of indicating your unavailability, that is only applied to the availability assignment when you're creating the event, which I'll go into a little more detail here. When you're using the availability, you have a list of employees, you have these bars showing when they're available. If they're not available at a certain time of day, you'd have chunks missing. You might have the whole morning missing or the whole day. And out of those people who have availability, you select them, and then you can stretch that shift as needed. This is our fanciest approach to managing your attendees because they can arrive and leave at different times. The other approaches do assume that they are arriving and leaving at the same time, the direct and the invite approaches. Going to jump back to the main view of the calendar. For Anne-Marie, going back to the main calendar, you can go down to the filter section. You can check mark the part that says include availability. You can filter the events. And that will make these extra entries appear. At first glance, it'll tell you how many people have at least some availability on that day. If you click on it, you'll get details, a list of all the employees, and the chunks of time where they are available. Additionally, in the settings editor, you can tell SMMware that essentially if you assign people to work 4-hour shifts, then if they only have 1 hour free, then you don't care. So you would tell SMMware that if you give it a minimum block of time in order to appear on this list, and you can say 4 hours, and that way, if they only have 3 hours available, they won't appear here, and it kind of declutters things. For Tom, yes, once the employee is assigned, they will get a notification via email and text message. And if you make a change to the event, or if you remove them from the event, they also get notified. For Melinda, at this point in time, SMMware doesn't support recurring unavailability. That is something that has sometimes been requested for, but it is not there yet. Going back to our main view here, once you're done looking at people's availability, you can uncheck this and filter it again so that you can just narrow it down to the actual events and kind of declutter the view. All right, so that is the discussion about calendars. If there's any more questions about calendars, now would be good. For mobile, I'll just mention that on a mobile device, you do access SMMware as a website. You can create a shortcut on the desktop, and when you tap on that, it'll open SMMware for you, and the experience is very much like using an app. But it is a website on mobile devices as well. The screen is rearranged so as to optimize it for the mobile experience, for a phone or for an iPad or tablet. For the integrations, we integrate with QuickBooks, both desktop and online. We also integrate with MailChimp. MailChimp, if you're not familiar with it, is a program for doing mass emails. They provide templates. They can tell you who's clicked on the email to open it and so on. And going back to SMMware, if you assign a contact to a given category, then that category becomes a tag over at MailChimp. So that way you can do things like say, hey, I want to send out a mass email, but I only want to send it to my real estate people, or I only want to send it to my home improvement people. Oh, I did not show you that. I'll go back here. I mentioned the map links, so I should demonstrate those. So here's an event. It has an address. Here's the link to the map. And this works on mobile devices as well. What we're doing is essentially handing you off to your phone's mapping function, and it will give you the turn-by-turn GPS directions. So for Fran, I think you're asking whether the notification has a link to the map, and I honestly don't remember. I'd have to go back and look. So for the text notifications, if it's an SMS email, then it's foreshortened because it only has so many characters. If you upgrade to the MMS version, then it has the full text of the same as the description would have. So that would be a yes if it's MMS. All right, so this is the mapping function. When you're done, you can just go back to the main view of SMMware. Mainly, we were talking about the MailChimp integration and how these categories become tags over at MailChimp. You can also arrange to have your clients copied over to MailChimp, and then they receive tags as being a current client or a past client, and they could be both. Someone, if you work for them in the past, then they get the past client tag, and if you were doing work for them again, they are still a past client. They would still have that tag. We also integrate with a service called Zapier. So QuickBooks and MailChimp are programs that SMMware talks directly to, but there are a great many programs out there, and it's not possible for SMMware to know how to talk to all of them. So we have, so there are services like Zapier, which act as middleware. So essentially what happens is you set this up, you would have an account at Zapier. If your needs are not very high, there's a free version. And if you have a lot of things to do, then eventually there are paid versions. But what happens is you have an account there, and you would tell Zapier and set it up with SMMware so that when you add a new client to SMMware, it tells Zapier, and then Zapier can tell some other service. So for instance, we do not integrate directly with Constant Contact, which is a similar program to MailChimp. But if you use Zapier, then SMMware will tell Zapier that there's a new client, and Zapier will tell Constant Contact. So you have the same effect. And that just opens up a lot more flexibility in terms of other programs that SMMware can talk to. So that's a pretty good summary of our capabilities, and I'll touch on a few more things before we go. Here I am at the corporate website, and you can see under the pricing and sign up page what our different levels are. We are simply month to month. There's no annual commitments. And at 10 active users, there would be $45 a month. And from 20 to 50, these are the other price levels. When I refer to active users, then there's a way in the associate profile where you can mark an employee as inactive and they don't count towards your quota. So if you have seasonal people, then you can mark them off when they're out of town. And maybe there's another seasonal group of people that come in, you activate them. So for Wenesta, if you hit refresh, then you should be able to get your screen back. My apologies, everybody. I've never seen this before where people had their screens freezing up, but today we seem to be having an issue. But if you do refresh your screen, it should bring back the live picture. So again, here's our different pricing levels. If you do subscribe, you would put in a site prefix. Every SMMware site has a format, something like xyz.smmmware.com, and you can have a prefix with your company name or at least an acronym of it, and that's where you would put it in the site prefix. I also wanted to touch on documentation. If you go to the company section under manuals, here's where you can download PDFs of the manuals. You can look at the web version of the manuals. And also here under the company page, you can find contact information. And you can find contact information for Liz, who is our trainer. For Wenesta, we're on the SMMware website, the corporate website, and we're looking at the company page and talking about Liz Donovan's contact information. The next thing I'll touch on before we wrap up is our YouTube channel. So SMMware offers various ways where you can learn for yourself. Our YouTube channel has quite a few videos. Some of them are overview videos, such as this webinar will be posted tomorrow. Other videos are very topic specific about how to enter clients and jobs, how to create invoices, managing your associates, and so on. So for Wenesta, I'm glad you were able to get that the screen moving again. And again, my apologies for the technical glitch on that end. So that sums up the tour of SMMware. We hope that you enjoyed it and found it useful. If there are any follow-up questions, contact information is here on the SMMware.com homepage. There's a phone number. You can go to the Contact Us page as well. You can simply email sales@SMMware.com or support@SMMware.com as well. And Marie, I believe that you had some questions or wanted to talk a little bit. So I will stick on the line with you for that. But for everybody else, that pretty much wraps things up. I'll take Anne Marie's questions plus any others that people have. And thank you again for coming. So Anne Marie, what did you want to ask about? Oh, you want to ask about the putting in hours where it's not part of a client. So for what you would typically do is you create a client that is for your company, create a client profile, put the company name, you'd create a job for it, and then you would put in the admin time against that administrative profile. Does that answer your question? Okay, so you would create a client profile and you'd put in your company name instead of a real client's name. Then you would create a job for the client profile, and then you would enter your hours against that. Let's see if I'm not sure if this system has one in place. So here's an example. There's a SMMware demo site profile. Search for demo. So here's the profile. This is a client profile, and it's for the company. And we have jobs against it, such as administrative overhead. And when an employee wants to put in time against the company, not against an actual real client, they would just come here and they would pick a job, SMMware demo site, administrative overhead, or materials overhead. All right, so it sounds like you're good with that. If there are any more questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I guess this is our last call for questions. I see that we still have some people on the line, so if you have your questions, now's the time. Thank you as well for everybody for joining. And again, if you have questions come up later, you saw my contact information, and I'd be happy to answer them. But other than that, everybody have a great day. For Tom, yes, this will be on YouTube tomorrow at the latest, possibly earlier.